Millionaire CEO goes to a blind date at a dog shelter, unaware who is about to sit across from him. The moment Warren Hale realized his blind date wasn't at a restaurant, but inside a dog shelter, everything felt wrong. Dogs barking, volunteers rushing past him, no reserved table, no quiet corner. Warren was a millionaire CEO, a man used to control, silence, and respect. But here, no one cared who he was. No one looked at him twice. And sitting just a few feet away was a woman who didn't even bother to impress him. He thought he was here to meet someone. He had no idea this place was about to expose everything he'd been running from. If you believe in compassion and the quiet strength of ordinary people, take a moment to like and subscribe. Stories like this remind us how one small act can change everything. Warren Hale had learned over many years how to design his life so that nothing ever felt out of place. Every meeting, every trip, and every relationship followed a structure he could anticipate and control, leaving little room for surprise or emotional exposure. As a self-made millionaire CEO, he was accustomed to environments that adjusted to him, not the other way around. Silence, efficiency, and predictability had become his version of safety. Standing inside that dog shelter, with no one reacting to his presence, he realized how fragile that safety actually was. In most rooms, Warren didn't need to introduce himself to be noticed. People sensed his authority through posture, timing, and the quiet confidence that came from years of influence. Here, those signals dissolved into the background noise of barking dogs and hurried footsteps. Volunteers moved past him without hesitation, focused on tasks that had nothing to do with hierarchy or power. The space operated on urgency, care, and exhaustion, not respect. That disconnect left him momentarily unsure of how to behave. He told himself this was temporary, just an unusual setting for a date he never truly wanted. The plan had been simple: show up, be polite, endure mild discomfort, then leave with his life unchanged. Warren had mastered the art of emotional efficiency, minimizing risk while maintaining appearances. Romance had slowly become another item he postponed, something he would address when life felt less demanding. Yet the longer he stood there, the more that internal script began to unravel. Across the room, Maya sat calmly beside a medium-sized dog curled at her feet, her attention fully grounded in the present moment. She didn't scan the room for him or adjust herself in anticipation. There was no visible effort to impress, no nervous checking of the door, no performative smile. She looked like someone who belonged exactly where she was. That quiet certainty unsettled Warren more than overt rejection would have. When their eyes finally met, the exchange felt neutral rather than charged, and that neutrality carried its own weight. Maya acknowledged him briefly, then returned her focus to the dog, as if Warren were just another person passing through. He wasn't offended so much as disoriented. His identity, usually his strongest currency, held no immediate value here. For the first time in a long while, he felt unremarkable. As he sat down across from her, Warren became acutely aware of how exposed he felt, without realizing why. There were no social cues guiding the interaction, no familiar rhythm to follow. Maya didn't lead with questions or curiosity about his life. Instead, she spoke about the shelter, the animals, and the challenges of weekends like this one. Her voice carried fatigue, but also resolve, and Warren found himself listening more closely than intended. The environment around them continued uninterrupted, indifferent to the significance of their meeting. Dogs barked, volunteers laughed softly, and supplies were moved from one end of the room to the other. Warren noticed how naturally Maya navigated that chaos, stepping in where she was needed without hesitation. She wasn't performing kindness, she was living inside it. That realization stirred something uncomfortable and unfamiliar within him. By the time Maya stood in motion for him to follow her deeper into the shelter, Warren sensed that this encounter was no longer a casual obligation. Whatever rules had governed his life outside these walls did not apply here. The place demanded presence, not status, and patience rather than solutions. As he followed her past the kennels, Warren understood that this date was already reshaping him in ways he hadn't prepared for, and somewhere ahead, a choice waited that would force him to confront who he truly was when control no longer worked. The moment that shifted everything didn't arrive with drama or raised voices, but with a small, almost invisible choice. As they stopped near a quiet corner of the shelter, a volunteer approached Maya with a clipboard and a tired expression. She whispered something quickly, clearly uncomfortable, and Maya's shoulders stiffened just slightly. Warren noticed the change before she spoke a single word. Something important had just entered the room. Maya explained that a long-anticipated donation had fallen through that very morning. The donor had offered several $1,000s, enough to cover medical care for multiple dogs, but had withdrawn it after the shelter refused to promise public recognition. There would be no photos, no plaques, no social media campaign tied to the gift, and that had been a deal-breaker. Maya spoke calmly, but the disappointment sat heavy in the air between them. Warren felt an unexpected tension form in his chest. For Warren, money had always been leverage, a way to solve problems quickly and cleanly. He had written checks like that dozens of times, sometimes without even remembering where they went afterward. Hearing that money had been refused felt illogical, almost reckless by his standards. He asked why they hadn't simply accepted the terms and helped the animals anyway. Maya didn't answer right away, which made the silence feel intentional. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, but there was something deeply personal underneath it. She said that help given for attention always came with strings, and those strings had a way of tightening later. She had learned that lesson years ago, in ways she didn't explain yet. The shelter had been burned before, and they were tired of paying hidden prices for visible generosity. Warren listened, unsettled by how quietly firm she was. That was the moment Warren realized this wasn't just a conversation, but a crossroads. He felt an instinctive urge to fix the situation, to step in and replace what had been lost. The solution felt obvious to him, almost automatic, and his mouth opened before he fully considered the implications. He offered help, casually, as if it were no different than any other problem he'd solved that week. Maya turned to him slowly, studying his face in a way she hadn't before. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no either. Instead, she asked him a question that stopped him cold, asking what he expected in return if he helped. The question wasn't accusatory, but it landed with unexpected weight. Warren realized he didn't have an immediate answer ready, which was rare for him. That hesitation marked the first real crack in the version of himself he brought into the shelter. Around them, the shelter continued moving, unaware that something fundamental had shifted. Dogs barked, volunteers laughed softly, life went on as usual. But for Warren, the room felt suddenly smaller, more intimate, as if the walls had closed in slightly. Maya turned away, saying she needed to check on something, leaving his offer hanging in the air. And in that unfinished moment, Warren felt the story pulling him forward, toward a choice he wasn't sure he was ready to make. After Maya stepped away to handle an issue near the intake area, Warren was left alone in the middle of the shelter, uncertain of where he belonged. No one gave him instructions, no one checked on him, and no one seemed concerned with his presence. The absence of expectation felt heavier than direct rejection would have. He stood there, hands loosely at his sides, realizing how unfamiliar it felt to simply exist without a role. For the first time in years, he had nowhere to position himself. Instinctively, Warren reached for his phone, searching for something familiar to anchor him. The screen lit up with notifications that suddenly felt distant and unimportant. Meetings, reminders, and unanswered messages waited patiently, unaware of how disconnected he felt from that world. The tools he relied on to regain control offered no relief here. He slipped the phone back into his pocket, aware that escape wasn't as easy as he had assumed. As he slowly walked along the row of kennels, the reality of the space pressed in around him. Dogs reacted differently to his presence, some barking loudly, others shrinking back quietly. One older dog remained still, watching him with tired eyes that carried neither hope nor fear. A nearby volunteer explained softly that the dog had been overlooked repeatedly due to age and health concerns. There was no urgency in the explanation, only resignation shaped by experience. That quiet resignation unsettled Warren more than desperation ever could. In his world, time was something to be managed, deadlines enforced, outcomes accelerated. Here, time moved at its own pace, indifferent to effort or intention. The dog's situation couldn't be optimized, negotiated, or solved quickly. It simply existed, demanding patience rather than strategy. Warren felt the uncomfortable truth settle in that some problems refused to be conquered. He became aware of a subtle shift inside himself, a discomfort rooted not in pity, but in recognition. This helplessness mirrored emotions he had spent years avoiding, feelings that surfaced only when control slipped away. He realized how carefully he had structured his life to prevent moments like this from lingering. Standing there, he couldn't redirect the feeling or rationalize it away. The shelter offered no distractions, only reflection. When Maya returned, she immediately noticed the change in him, though she didn't call attention to it. She asked quietly if he was doing all right, her tone neutral and unassuming. Warren hesitated before answering, surprised by how difficult honesty felt in that moment. He admitted that the place felt heavier than he had expected. Maya nodded, as if that reaction was not only normal, but necessary. She explained that the shelter had a way of confronting people with limits they didn't choose. It forced everyone, volunteers included, to accept that care didn't always come with resolution. Some days ended without improvement, and some stories remained unfinished. That reality demanded emotional endurance rather than optimism. Warren listened, sensing that she wasn't warning him away, only telling the truth. As they stood together near the kennels, the silence between them carried new weight. Warren felt torn between the urge to retreat and an unexpected desire to stay present, despite the discomfort. This was no longer about an awkward date or unfamiliar surroundings. Something deeper had been exposed, something he could no longer ignore. And as Maya gestured for him to follow her further into the shelter, Warren understood that stepping forward meant surrendering the last illusion of control he still held. As they moved to a quieter area of the shelter, Maya finally shared a part of her story she rarely offered to anyone outside that space. She explained that she hadn't always worked with animals, and that there was a time when her life had been defined by loss rather than care. Years earlier, she had depended on help herself, standing on the receiving end of generosity that came with expectations she couldn't meet. Those experiences had reshaped the way she understood kindness and its hidden costs. Maya described how public donations once saved her from a difficult moment, but left scars that took much longer to heal. People had wanted gratitude displayed, stories told, smiles held longer than they felt natural. When she couldn't perform appreciation the way others expected, the help slowly disappeared. That was when she learned that kindness tied to visibility could feel like a transaction instead of support. Warren listened closely, realizing this wasn't a rehearsed story but a memory that still lived close to the surface. She told him that the shelter became her way of giving back without conditions, a place where effort mattered more than appearances. No one there cared who you were outside those walls, only whether you showed up when things were hard. Animals didn't ask for explanations or promises, just presence. That simplicity was what had kept her there, even on days when the work drained her completely. Warren felt the weight of her words settle in slowly, challenging ideas he had never questioned before. Warren responded honestly, admitting that he had always believed money solved most problems if applied correctly. He explained how giving had become part of his identity, but rarely something that required him to stay involved. Writing a check allowed him to move on quickly, untouched by the outcome. Listening to Maya, he recognized how distant that version of generosity now felt in this environment. The realization wasn't comfortable, but it felt necessary. Maya didn't judge him for it, which surprised him more than criticism would have. She simply said that everyone learned how to survive in different ways, and that survival habits didn't always translate into connection. What mattered, she explained, was whether someone was willing to unlearn when given the chance. That idea lingered in the space between them, quietly demanding attention. Warren wasn't sure if he had ever truly unlearned anything before. They paused near the older dog again, the one that seemed to watch without hope or urgency. Maya explained that his medical bills would drain the shelter's remaining funds for the month, leaving little room for emergencies. It was a choice she wrestled with constantly, knowing it might mean saying no to others later. Warren felt the tension of that decision press against him, heavier now that he understood the stakes. This wasn't about saving one dog, but about how much loss someone was willing to hold. For a moment, Warren imagined what it would mean to stay present through something like that, without stepping away once the money was given. The idea felt foreign and unsettling, yet strangely compelling. He realized that offering help now would mean more than a transaction. It would mean involvement, patience, and uncertainty. That kind of commitment scared him in ways he wasn't ready to admit aloud. Still, the thought refused to leave. As the shelter lights flickered slightly with the late afternoon shift change, Maya mentioned that days like this tested her resolve more than any other. She wondered aloud whether choosing care over efficiency always made sense, even when it hurt. Warren didn't answer right away, because the question felt larger than the moment itself. Standing there, surrounded by quiet need and unfinished stories, he sensed that the next choice he made would define far more than just this date. Warren didn't announce any decision right away, and that restraint surprised even him. Instead of pulling out his phone or making promises, he chose to stay, walking beside Maya as she continued her work through the shelter. He helped where he could, holding leashes, carrying supplies, listening more than speaking. Each small action felt unfamiliar, not because it was difficult, but because it required his presence without control. For the first time, he wasn't trying to solve the problem quickly, only to understand it fully. Maya noticed the shift in him gradually, not through words, but through consistency. He didn't disappear when things became uncomfortable or inconvenient, and he didn't push for recognition. She explained routines, challenges, and the emotional toll of watching animals wait day after day without certainty. Warren absorbed these details with a focus he usually reserved for high-stakes negotiations. The difference was that this time, the stakes were measured in trust rather than profit. As the afternoon passed, Warren learned about the quiet sacrifices that kept the shelter running. Volunteers worked second jobs, skipped meals, and carried emotional burdens they rarely shared outside those walls. Maya spoke about burnout openly, about how kindness required maintenance just like anything else, or it would collapse under its own weight. Warren found himself reflecting on how little he had understood about sustained care. Giving once was easy, but staying involved demanded something deeper. When a medical emergency briefly disrupted the calm, Warren didn't step back. He followed instructions, stayed out of the way when needed, and offered support without trying to lead. That moment revealed something to Maya that conversation alone could not. She saw someone used to authority willingly take a supporting role. It didn't erase her doubts, but it softened them. Later, they sat together in a small break area, both visibly tired in different ways. Warren admitted that slowing down felt harder than any professional challenge he'd faced. He explained that stillness made room for thoughts he had spent years avoiding. Maya listened without interruption, recognizing the vulnerability beneath his words. It was the first time their connection felt mutual rather than observational. Maya shared that she often wondered whether people like Warren could truly change or whether moments like this were temporary detours. She didn't ask the question accusingly, but with genuine curiosity shaped by past disappointments. Warren didn't rush to reassure her, knowing empty promises would mean nothing. Instead, he acknowledged that he didn't know the answer himself. That honesty created a fragile but real bridge between them. As the shelter prepared to close for the evening, Warren realized he hadn't checked his phone in hours. Meetings had been missed, messages unanswered, and yet none of it felt urgent anymore. The weight he carried earlier had shifted, replaced by a quiet sense of responsibility that felt earned rather than imposed. Maya noticed his reluctance to leave, sensing that something unresolved still held him there. Neither of them spoke about it directly. Standing near the exit, Warren hesitated before saying goodbye, aware that this moment marked a choice rather than a pause. He understood that whatever he did next would either reinforce old patterns or begin something unfamiliar and demanding. Maya waited, giving him space without pressure, her expression open but guarded. And as the door closed behind the last volunteer, the question of whether Warren would return lingered between them, unanswered and heavy with possibility. When Warren returned to the shelter the following morning, it wasn't because anyone had asked him to. There was no scheduled meeting, no expectation waiting for him, and no guarantee that Maya would even be there. He arrived earlier than necessary, standing quietly near the entrance, watching the place come alive again. The decision to come back felt heavier than any business commitment he had made in years. This time, he understood that showing up meant more than being present for a moment. Maya was surprised to see him, though she didn't let it show immediately. She greeted him with a nod that carried both recognition and caution, aware that many people visited once and never returned. Warren didn't explain himself right away, which was unusual for someone accustomed to justifying every move. Instead, he asked what needed to be done that day. That simple question, shifted something subtle but important between them. As they worked side by side, their rhythm became more natural, shaped by shared effort rather than conversation. Warren followed Maya's lead, trusting her experience and respecting the pace she set. There was no performance in his actions, no attempt to impress or redeem himself. Maya noticed that he listened carefully, adjusting without being told twice. Trust began forming not through declarations, but through repetition. Later that afternoon, they spent time with the older dog together, sitting quietly without trying to force interaction. Maya explained the dog's condition in detail, the limitations, the uncertainty, and the likelihood that adoption might never come. Warren absorbed every word, resisting the urge to jump to solutions. He felt the weight of commitment pressing against him in a way that couldn't be outsourced or delayed. This was a moment that required staying, not fixing. Warren admitted that this kind of connection scared him more than financial risk ever had. He spoke about how relationships in his life had always been transactional, even when they didn't look that way from the outside. Maya listened, recognizing a familiar pattern of protection through distance. She shared that closeness had once cost her deeply, and that trust had never come easily since. Their honesty created a fragile space neither rushed to fill. The moment that sealed their connection came without witnesses or ceremony. Warren asked if he could help with the dog's care, not by funding it, but by being involved directly. Maya looked at him carefully, measuring sincerity against experience. She agreed cautiously, making it clear that this wasn't a symbolic gesture but a responsibility. Warren accepted without hesitation, understanding the weight of what he was stepping into. That decision marked the first true commitment between them, one built on presence rather than promise. They weren't partners, not yet, and romance remained distant and undefined. What connected them was something quieter and more durable, a shared willingness to hold uncertainty together. The shelter continued around them, unaware that two lives had shifted in alignment. Neither of them knew where this connection would lead, only that it had changed them both. As the day came to an end, Warren felt a sense of grounding he hadn't experienced in years. Maya watched him leave with cautious optimism, aware that consistency would matter more than intention. The door closed softly behind him, leaving the question of permanence hanging in the air. For both of them, this wasn't a resolution, but an opening, and the choice to keep showing up would soon be tested in ways neither could predict. The following weeks brought challenges that neither Warren nor Maya could have predicted when they first met. As Warren became more involved with the shelter, realities beyond the walls began to surface, including resistance from people in his own life. Friends questioned his sudden absence, colleagues expressed concern about missed meetings, and his board quietly reminded him that attention was currency he could not afford to misplace. The pressure was subtle but persistent, pulling him back toward the life he had carefully constructed. For the first time, Warren felt torn between two versions of himself that could not coexist comfortably. Maya faced her own external pressures as well, ones she had grown used to carrying alone. The shelter's finances grew tighter as medical costs rose, and volunteers showed signs of exhaustion that no amount of goodwill could fully erase. She worried about making the wrong decisions, about choosing one life over another when resources were limited. Though she rarely voiced these fears, they lived beneath her steady exterior. Warren began to see how much strength it took for her to remain open in the face of constant uncertainty. When the older dog's condition worsened, the strain between them became unavoidable. Treatment options narrowed, and the likelihood of recovery became uncertain, forcing conversations neither of them wanted to have. Warren felt the familiar urge to step in decisively, to override the situation with money or influence, but he stopped himself. Instead, he asked Maya what she needed, not as a problem solver, but as someone willing to share the burden. That shift marked a deeper level of understanding between them. Outside voices grew louder, particularly from people who questioned Warren's motives. Some assumed his involvement was temporary, a phase driven by guilt or curiosity rather than commitment. Others warned Maya privately, reminding her of past disappointments and urging caution. Those doubts planted seeds of fear that neither of them could ignore. The connection they had built now faced tests that went far beyond personal intention. As the weeks continued, Warren began to experience a kind of pressure he had never faced before, not because it was louder or more aggressive, but because it questioned the foundation of his identity. People around him noticed the changes before he fully understood them himself, commenting on his absence, his quieter demeanor, and his reluctance to engage in conversations that once energized him. Meetings felt hollow, victories felt smaller, and decisions that once brought satisfaction now carried an aftertaste of emptiness. It wasn't that his old life had become wrong, but that it no longer felt complete. At the same time, Maya found herself confronting fears she had managed for years. Letting Warren get closer meant reopening parts of herself she had sealed after learning how easily hope could turn into disappointment. She had built a life centered on service because it gave her purpose without demanding vulnerability. Now, vulnerability was quietly making its way back into her world, challenging the boundaries she relied on to feel safe. She struggled with the possibility that this connection could eventually cost her more than she was willing to lose. The older dog became a silent center point for those tensions, embodying both hope and limitation. His fragile progress mirrored the uncertainty between Warren and Maya, improving slowly while remaining vulnerable to setbacks. Each vet visit and difficult conversation reinforced the reality that commitment did not guarantee success. Warren felt frustration rise when effort didn't produce immediate results, forcing him to sit with outcomes he couldn't control. That discomfort deepened his understanding of what care truly required. During one particularly difficult evening, when exhaustion stripped away their usual restraint, Warren admitted that he was afraid of failing at this in ways he never had before. Not professionally or financially, but emotionally, in a space where excuses held no weight. Maya listened carefully, recognizing the courage it took for him to name that fear aloud. She shared that she was afraid too, not of loss itself, but of believing again after learning how painful belief could be. That shared honesty didn't resolve their doubts, but grounded them in something real. By the end of that stretch of time, both understood that they were no longer dealing with a temporary intersection of lives. This was no longer about a shelter, a dog, or even a relationship forming quietly between them. It was about choosing whether growth was worth the discomfort it demanded. With that question hanging between them, unresolved and heavy, the story moved closer to a truth that would soon reshape everything they thought they knew. One evening, after a particularly difficult day, Warren admitted that walking away would be easier than staying. He spoke honestly about the cost of choosing a path that didn't align with his previous life, acknowledging the sacrifices it would require. Maya listened, understanding the weight of that truth without diminishing it. She shared that she had learned long ago that love and care often demanded more than people expected. Their conversation wasn't about convincing one another, but about naming the reality they faced. The shelter became a space where those tensions played out quietly but persistently. Warren found himself more affected by setbacks than he anticipated, feeling grief in ways he had trained himself to avoid. Maya struggled with the fear of leaning on someone who might eventually leave. Their bond deepened through shared vulnerability, even as uncertainty threatened to pull them apart. Neither could deny that they were changing. As days passed, tenderness surfaced in quiet ways neither of them named. They shared small victories, endured losses, and learned how to sit with disappointment without turning away. Warren realized growth rarely came through dramatic gestures, but through staying when leaving felt easier. Maya noticed his effort to unlearn habits that once protected him. Those moments didn't bring certainty, but created a fragile continuity neither wanted to lose. As that period came to a close, the question between them shifted decisively. It was no longer about change itself, but about accepting its consequences. External pressures closed in, demanding clarity where none yet existed. The future felt unstable, shaped by forces they couldn't fully control. And with that uncertainty pressing closer, the story moved toward a revelation that would soon reframe everything they believed. The revelation came on a quiet afternoon when the shelter was unusually calm, giving space for conversations that were often postponed by urgency. Maya asked Warren to sit with her in the small office near the back, a place filled with old folders, handwritten notes, and photos of animals that had passed through over the years. Her tone was gentle but serious, signaling that what she was about to share carried weight. Warren sensed the shift immediately and listened without interruption. This wasn't a moment for explanations, only for truth. Maya explained that she had known who Warren was long before the blind date ever happened. The organizer had mentioned his name casually, assuming it would impress her or make the meeting feel special. Instead, it had triggered something else entirely, a memory of the kind of help that once changed her life but left her deeply conflicted. She hadn't accepted the date out of curiosity or hope for romance, but because she believed some people needed to experience vulnerability before they could understand it. Warren felt the ground shift beneath that admission. She told him that years earlier, a stranger's generosity had saved her during one of the hardest periods of her life. The help had been real, meaningful, and necessary, but it had also come wrapped in expectations she hadn't known how to navigate. Gratitude had turned into performance, and dependence into shame. That experience had taught her that kindness could heal or harm, depending on how it was given. The shelter was her way of redefining what help could look like. Warren listened as the pieces connected in ways he hadn't anticipated. He realized that he hadn't been invited there to be admired or changed overnight, but to be confronted gently with a reality he had avoided. Maya hadn't tried to trap or manipulate him. She had offered him a mirror instead. The blind date wasn't a test of compatibility, but of willingness to see. That understanding reframed every moment they had shared. Maya admitted she hadn't known whether he would stay or walk away once things became uncomfortable. She had prepared herself for disappointment, knowing that many people chose distance when faced with complexity. What surprised her was not that he stayed, but how he stayed, without demanding control or recognition. That choice challenged assumptions she had built to protect herself. It also reopened fears she wasn't sure she was ready to face. Warren responded with honesty that matched the vulnerability of her confession. He told her that learning he had been chosen intentionally unsettled him, but not in a way that felt wrong. For the first time, he saw how his presence alone, without solutions or status, had value. He acknowledged that he had spent years avoiding situations that stripped him of certainty. This experience forced him to confront parts of himself he hadn't known how to reach. The room felt smaller as their shared understanding deepened, filled with unspoken emotion and careful restraint. Neither of them rushed to label what they had built, knowing that naming it too quickly could undo its fragile balance. What mattered was that the truth had been spoken and received without defensiveness. Trust, once broken for both of them, was being renegotiated quietly. That process felt both hopeful and terrifying. As they left the office together, nothing about their situation was resolved, but everything felt different. The revelation didn't offer closure, only clarity, and clarity carried its own responsibility. Both understood that moving forward would require courage they hadn't yet fully measured. The shelter returned to its usual rhythm around them, unchanged by the moment that had just occurred. And with that truth now between them, the path ahead felt more uncertain, yet more honest than ever before. In the weeks that followed the revelation, Warren's presence at the shelter became steady rather than symbolic. He showed up without announcing himself, worked alongside the volunteers, and accepted correction without defensiveness. There were no cameras, no press, and no quiet attempts to reshape the story in his favor. What mattered now was consistency, something far harder to maintain than a single grand gesture. Maya noticed the change not through words, but through repetition. The older dog's condition stabilized slowly, not through miracles, but through careful attention and time. Warren learned how fragile progress could be, how easily hope could rise and fall within a single day. He stayed through setbacks, discomfort, and moments when effort didn't guarantee improvement. That patience marked a new rhythm in his life, one that couldn't be rushed or optimized. For the first time, he allowed himself to remain present without needing control. Maya, in turn, began to lower the quiet defenses she had carried for years. She trusted Warren not because he promised permanence, but because he respected her boundaries and the shelter's needs. Their connection grew without labels, shaped by shared responsibility rather than expectation. Conversations became easier, laughter more frequent, and silence more comfortable. Healing didn't arrive suddenly, but it became visible in small, ordinary moments. Outside the shelter, Warren made deliberate changes that reflected what he had learned. He adjusted his schedule, delegated differently, and stepped back from commitments that no longer aligned with who he was becoming. Those shifts didn't come without cost, but they felt intentional rather than reactive. His life began to feel integrated instead of divided, grounded by values that extended beyond success. The transformation was quiet, but unmistakable. One afternoon, after a long day of work, Warren made a choice that felt final in its simplicity. He completed the adoption paperwork for the older dog, not as a statement, but as a commitment. Maya watched from a distance, understanding the weight of that decision without needing it explained. The moment didn't require applause or validation. It was enough that it happened. The shelter marked the adoption with a small note on a board near the entrance, nothing more. Volunteers smiled, offered congratulations, then returned to their work. Life moved forward, unchanged, yet deeply impacted by that single act of care. Warren felt a sense of belonging he hadn't known he was missing. For the first time, something in his life felt chosen rather than earned. As Warren and Maya walked out together that evening, there was no dramatic declaration of love or promise of forever. What existed between them was quieter and more resilient, built on trust, patience, and shared experience. They understood that healing didn't mean erasing the past, but learning how to carry it differently. The future remained uncertain, but it no longer felt empty. The story didn't end with perfection, but with possibility rooted in kindness. Two people who had learned to protect themselves found a way to stay open without losing who they were. The shelter remained, the work continued, and life unfolded as it always did, imperfect and demanding. Yet something fundamental had shifted, leaving space for growth, connection, and meaning. And that quiet transformation became the true legacy of a blind date that was never meant to be ordinary. Thanks for listening. If this story touched your heart, subscribe and turn on notifications for more stories that remind us that goodness is still alive in the world. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. See you in the next story.